This week on Off the Air, Michael K.
Welcome to another edition of Off the Air, the legacy of WFUV Sports. On this episode, we're pleased to have the television voice of the New York Yankees, the host of the Michael K. Show on 98.7 ESPN and the Yes Network. Michael K., Fordham class of 1982. Michael, appreciate you being here.
You got it, guys. My pleasure.
So, Michael, let's start with your roots in the Bronx and Fordham. When did it creep into your mind that sports broadcasting was where you wanted to be in your life?
Well, probably crept in when I started to get afraid of being hit by a pitch. I wanted to be involved with the Yankees in some way. And, when you're a young kid, you want to play for the Yankees. And I just knew that I couldn't. I was a very rational young man, let's put it that way. So at the age of 9, I said, well, I'm not going to play for them. So now I want to be their announcer. Obviously a pie in the sky kind of dream, but that's when it first entered my thought process that's what I want to do. And, all these years later, here I am. I'm about to start my 30th year doing it. So it's kind of amazing.
And Michael, when you think about that, your sister Debbie ended up going to Fordham. Did that make it an easy transition for you, knowing what you wanted to do, that Fordham was going to be the spot for you to continue growing and searching for your career?
Andrew, I'll tell you what, that was like the biggest thing. Debbie paved the way for me in high school. I went to Bronx Science right after she did. And then when she went to Fordham, I got a chance to see Fordham when I would, go visit her. So it was a place that I liked. I knew that FUV existed. And the funny part is that when I was a freshman and she was a senior, I would sleep in my car between classes. I was a commuter. I didn't really socialize that much. I was kind of shy. And she kind of just dragged me out of the car one day. And she said, you know what? You want to be a broadcaster, you just go up to WFUV. So she kind of pushed me a little bit. If she wasn't there, I don't know if I would have had the gumption to do it. She brought me to the first I started writing for the Ram, and then she brought me to FUV, and I became a part of FUV, and I never looked back.
You're at FUV and you're looking to forge your path, and then you run into one Mike Breen, and the story.
He ran into me.
Okay, so with that being said, what do you recall about that interaction?
Well, it's funny because I was a year ahead of him because I had skipped a grade. So we're the same age, but I skipped 8th grade. I went from 7th to 9th. And I was just at FUV and I was already comfortable there. And, the way he tells it, he was very uncomfortable. He just didn't feel like he fit. And, I think he unfairly gives me credit for, making him feel comfortable there. But he walked into the station one day when it was on the 3rd floor of Keating Hall. And I was having this dramatic, argument with a young lady, how, I was saying, I know she wanted to date me and, why can't she just admit it? And it was all kind of tongue in cheek. And the way Mike tells it, that he saw this and said, this guy's really secure. I want to, he looks like a guy that would be fun to hang out with. So he introduced himself to me, and then I introduced him to all of my friends. And all of a sudden he felt comfortable rather than trying to fit in with people that he didn't know. And as they say, the rest is history for him.
You have that,
and that
story.
Girl never dated me, by the way. Never dated me.
You have that story sitting down with Mike and dreaming about what could be. You as the voice of the Yankees, Mike as the voice of the Knicks. All these years later, how impactful has that relationship, that friendship been to you?
You know what? It's important to have somebody who knows honestly what you're going through. You could talk to people, friends that aren't in the business, and they don't quite get the things that are affecting you or things that might bother you that they don't understand because they're not the ones with the earpieces in and they're not the ones hearing people talk in their ear and stuff like that. So Mike and I have lived the same life, he with the Knicks and me with the Yankees. And not only is he, he's one of my best friends, if not my best friend. If there's an issue or if I need advice, I know I could call him, and he feels the same way about me. So when he walked into that station, all those many years ago, that forged a relationship that I'm sure that will be with us until, we are no longer here. So it's so invaluable to have a friend like that and a sounding board who's been there, done that, and knows everything that you might be going through.
And Michael, you mentioned working at FUV, also working at the Ram. I've had the privilege to do the same as well as E-Man. Can you just kind of take us into a week in the life of Michael K throughout certain parts of the semester where you have broadcasts, you might be going to cover a Yankees game, you have production nights at the Ram. Can you just kind of take us into a week at your busiest when you were at Fordham?
Well, it's really weird because I wasn't living on campus, so I was a commuter, but I spent like almost the whole day there. I'd get there, and whenever my first class was, and anytime I wasn't there, I was in the radio station or I was in the newspaper. And it's funny because I was at the Ram for 2 years, and when they didn't make me the sports director, then I decided to go to the paper, and I became the sports director there. And just to tell you how it works, like the night that John Lennon was killed, we were putting the paper together, and so we had to tear the whole thing up because we wanted to have John Lennon on the front of it. And I ran upstairs. I'll always remember this. I ran up to Keating Hall to FUV because they had a ticker tape machine there that would like spit out the news. I don't think that exists anymore. So I grabbed the alert that said John Lennon has been shot and killed in front of his apartment, and I brought it back to the paper. And the paper, I don't believe was in Keating Hall. It was another building. I can't recall. And I ran it over, and we actually put the ticker announcement that John Lennon had died from the Associated Press, and we put that on the front of the paper. And it was like, I wish I had kept that paper because we did a really good job tearing up the paper and kind of putting it back together. But everything revolved around FUV, the paper. If you couldn't find me, if I wasn't in a class, I was there, or I was in the campus center, with my buddies, having lunch or whatever the case may be. So I would probably be at Fordham from 8 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night. And I probably just slept at home.
When you jog that FUV memory, you have road trips, you have games. Is there a unique experience or road trip that sticks out that'll always carry with you?
Well, there's one that I wasn't even on, and it sticks with me. Fordham was playing Holy Cross, and it was my senior year, and I was the sports director. And I had mono, so I couldn't go to the game. I was supposed to announce that game, and I was home with a high fever, and I just kept getting calls that the announcers aren't here. The announcers aren't here. And it was Bob Rinaldi, who is Tom Rinaldi's brother. Tom Rinaldi, now of Fox Sports, used to be on ESPN. And he was one of the announcers, and Eddie Caginelli was the other. And he was my assistant sports director, and they weren't there. And it was like a half hour before. And I had a rule as a sports director that you had to be there like 2.5 hours before the game. You had to. And if you didn't, you get suspended. And I also had another rule that you couldn't say we. You could never call Fordham we. I said, because we're not them. We're the media. But I kept getting phone calls. I had like 103 fever, and they're not here. They're not here. They're not here. And finally, they showed up. I mean, I'm like perspiring amazingly. Forget about the fever. If there's nobody to do the game, what's going to happen? And like 10 minutes before tip-off, they showed up. And at halftime, I got them on the phone. I said, what happened? Well, Holy Cross is in Worcester. Well, Bob works for the U.S. Treasury right now, so he's a pretty smart guy. He goes, I'm driving, and we didn't see any sign for Worcester. He said, finally, I pulled over, and the guy said, you passed it an hour and a half ago. I said, well, how did you miss the sign? And he goes, I thought it was spelled W-O-O-S-T-R, but Worcester spelled W-O-R-C-E-S-T-R. He didn't know how to spell the place that he had to go, so he almost missed the game. So that's something that will always stick with me. And another one is when we all did, we went to Notre Dame to do the game. And, we traveled with the team, the announcers that were going to do the game. But all of our buddies came, and they all drove. And Mike Breen drove. He wasn't on the broadcast. And I remember all of us piled into one hotel room, and Mike slept on the top of the rack where you hang the clothes. I don't know how he got up there, but that was the only free space to actually sleep. So that's always an amazing memory. Fordham ended up losing, but we got used to that. But that was an amazing memory that night.
Michael, it's interesting because you were the sports director at FUV, and you're also a student. So How do you toe the line between, obviously you're one of the guys, but you are the supervisor, you are in charge. How was that, juggling those responsibilities as the sports director in your time with FUV?
It was tough, Andrew. It really was. It was like the sort of deal where a guy who becomes a manager that had been a teammate for so long, I was still their friend, but they understood. They made it very, very easy. The thing that was difficult was that being a sports director back then was like a full-time job, where you had to order the telephone lines to broadcast on the road. You had to put together the travel. You had to put together the schedules. It was all, the sports director. And it wasn't a position where you even got credit. You didn't get school credit. And I believe that now you get a little bit of a stipend too. That was not the case back then, where everything was done, for the experience. And then you had, a full load of classes as well. So it was like having, 2.5 full-time jobs. Classes a job, FUV was a job, and then the paper, which I think it came out once a week. That wasn't a full-time job, but it certainly was a responsibility for sure. But in terms of like being the quote unquote boss of your friends, they made it easy. They understood. I wasn't one of these hard edge guys. I just made up the schedule. That's when they sucked up, because they wanted to do games. So when I made up the schedule, they all of a sudden, buying me beers at the Ramskeller and stuff like that. But it worked out. Everybody, we're still friends, so I didn't mess it up that bad.
So you're the sports director at FUV, then you go on to write for the Daily News and the Post. How did those professional relationships you forged at FUV pay dividends earlier in your career?
Well, one of the main reasons I got the job at the Post was we weren't able to get a lot of credentials to the major sports back then. And I worked at it, and I'd get an occasional Knick game, get an occasional Yankee game, but not like a full pass or anything like that. So you had to really make the most of it. And the times that I went to the Knick game, I was a big reader of the New York Post back then. And I just introduced myself to Peter Vesey, and I somehow convinced him to come on to one-on-one, which was on 11 to 2 in the morning, 11 at night to 2 in the morning on Sundays at that point. And he said the only way he would do, he didn't want to do 3 hours on the phone, but I had to pick him up. He lived in Stuyvesant Town in Manhattan, and I had to make sure that he had a cherry pie. So in my senior year, we must have had him on 3 times. I mean, just think about that, having like preeminent. He's a Hall of Famer now. Come up to the studios and sit there and take phone calls and take questions from people, and I just forged a relationship. I liked him, he liked me, and so when I graduated from Fordham, I was not ready to be on the air by any stretch of the imagination. I had a really thick Bronx accent, and so I sent out resumes to newspapers, and my uncle Danny, the late actor Danny Aiello, knew somebody at the Post. So they looked at, my resume because he told them to, but they didn't really act on it. But I knew that they had it. So I just called up Peter Vesey and I said, Peter, can you just tell me exactly what's going on, just so I could move on from hoping that I'm going to get this job? And he called up the sports director at the time. He said, listen, don't jerk this kid around. Either you have something for him or you don't. Just don't jerk him around. And the next day they called me in for an interview, and I was hired to be a clerk, get people coffee and get people lunch, file pictures, do all the racing agate and stuff like that. And I turned that into like writing on my own time, where I was off the clock. So I think my shift was like from maybe 10 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. And so I figured, if they didn't have a game covered, I'd volunteer to do a college game. So I would do that, and I would write on my own time, and I got paid as a writer. But then they ended up promoting me to writer, and the Post job turned into the Daily News job, and the Daily News job turned into me getting the MSG position, doing the clubhouse report on with Al Troutwig, and that got me the radio job, and so on and so forth, and then it eventually got me the Yes job. So it all started with that job with the New York Post and my relationship with Peter Vesey.
And Michael, you talk about those occasional times where you would get credentials to professional games. A lot of college radio stations don't even have that opportunity at all. So for you, how vital was it for you to be in that atmosphere, to be in a locker room, to introduce yourself to reporters, and transitioning from college to your career? How vital was it just getting those opportunities in the first place?
It was gigantic, because it's not like you're getting, credentials to a small college situation. You're seeing the big time at work. And more than even like meeting people, although meeting, Peter Vesey and introducing myself turned out to be, a life-changing thing. But just to see the work that went into it, the seriousness of it, and how people comported themselves, and how you interviewed athletes. I did a lot of watching, a lot of observing, so that when I was in that situation as a professional, you envision yourself that way, and how I would want to be acting, and how I would want to be treated, and how I would want to treat athletes. So I think it's invaluable, especially when you're at the level in New York and you get to see how it's done at Madison Square Garden and Yankee Stadium, and at the time, Shea Stadium. That was big. I mean, experience is so important, so that the first time you're thrown in there as a professional, it's not doing a belly flop into the pool. You've already been in there. You've swum a couple of laps. So it was invaluable.
Setting that goal at 9 years old to be the voice of the Yankees, and then you just mentioned those steps you took along the way to get there. When you map it out when you're young, you have the dream path of getting to that position. How did your path differ in any way? Were there any roadblocks or surprises along the way?
It wasn't even close. I mean, when you're 9 years old, you have no idea. I mean, I want to be the Yankee announcer. You don't know how you're supposed to become a Yankee announcer. That's your stupid dream. And when young people ask me, advice, I mean, my way was so funky and so different. I don't know if it could be recreated. I mean, it was so much fortune and luck involved. I mean, I'm not the most talented guy in the world, but I seem to always be in the right place at the right time. And, the radio job. I mean, I had probably given up on being the Yankee announcer. I figured, okay, being the Yankee beat writer for the New York Post and the Daily News was what I was going to be. And then, you start to map in your head, well, if you don't become an announcer, maybe you become a columnist, and you could be a Mike Lupica or a Dick Young. And then, John Sterling's partner on the radio quit. Didn't like him. They hated each other. Joe Angel hated each other. And he didn't have a partner. And then they tried out all these people, 500 people, 5,000 people. And I don't know how I got the job. I ended up getting the job. I tried out, and, they had seen my work on MSG, because it's funny how everything ties together, guys. It's like when I did one-on-one, there was a guy who went to Marist who listened to one-on-one. I mean, this was before FAN. And he loved it. He loved everybody on it. And he said to himself, if I ever get in a position, I'm going to hire these guys. He just loved listening to us. That guy was Mike McCarthy, who became the president of the MSG network. I mean, just think about how lucky that is. And he was there when I was at the Daily News and the MSG getting the Yankee rights. And I pitched to him, you know what? Television is the medium of immediacy. And you guys are always a day behind on all the stories. You read the newspapers and you react to that. You guys should have a reporter in the clubhouse, and that person should break the story on your air, rather than you reacting to a story that was broken in the newspapers. The newspapers can't be immediate. You guys can. You're alive. And he bought it because he had known me from one-on-one. And so I became the title of my segment without traveling was Tomorrow's News Today. So I still had the Daily News, but I brought a notepad into the clubhouse, and I wrote everything down, and then I would read the quotes to Al. And then I would write the story for the Daily News. The only thing I told them that I wouldn't break an exclusive, because the Daily News obviously was paying me more money, and that was my primary employer. But because I was on MSG, that allowed people to think maybe he could do radio. That's how I got to be asked to try out for the radio gig. And then I kept doing that while I was on radio. I kept being the MSG reporter, which is what Meredith Marakovitz does for us now on Yes. And John Filippelli, who I didn't know from Adam and didn't know me from Adam, when he was starting the Yes Network, wanted a young guy to be the play-by-play guy. And at that point, I guess I was 40. And he had seen me on MSG and thought I had a good presence about me, and then wanted me to be the play-by-play guy. Again, every domino fell the exact perfect way. So when I sat, there's no way as the 9-year-old that I even knew the MSG network would have existed. I didn't know that John Filippelli existed. I didn't know there'd be a Yes Network. So again, so much luck, so much of, they say luck is the residue of design. Branch Rickey said that. I didn't design this. This is a lot of luck.
Yeah, the domino certainly fell in your favor. But Michael, is it even more special when you consider you grow up in the Bronx, you go to Bronx Science, then Fordham is right there, and you're able to stay in New York? A lot of aspiring sports media members, they have to go elsewhere to kind of get their start and get their legs up from under them. So for you, how special was it that you were able to stay in New York and then everything just starts to develop and then you find yourself as the voice of the New York Yankees, something that you've been looking forward to since you were 9?
That that's why, I don't walk into Yankee Stadium and like pinch myself and realize how lucky I am. I sit in the booth sometimes and I take it all in because it's kind of hokey, but I was in the upper deck, the last row of the upper deck behind home plate. That's where I sat for $1.50 when I would go to games. And I realized how fortunate I am to be doing this. A Bronx kid living out his dream. And it's amazing to me. And you bring up the fact that I didn't have to go out of town. Mike Breen went to Poughkeepsie and lived there for 2 years and made no money whatsoever. And I look at Major League Baseball announcers that spend years in the minor leagues, and I have such admiration for them because I know I could not have done that. I just could not have handled it. And that's why I probably went into the newspaper business, because I was told by a lot of people when I was leaving Fordham, if you want to make it in the broadcasting business, you're going to have to go to a small market, work your way back. I was really close with my family. I couldn't picture like leaving New York. And so that probably erased the idea of broadcasting in my mind. But somehow I turned the newspaper gig into broadcasting. Again, very unorthodox, but I do realize how lucky I am because, again, you have to know your limitations. Like I knew I couldn't hit, and I knew I was afraid of getting hit by a baseball. I knew I would not be able to move to Podunk, USA and sit there and be the groundskeeper and, be the media relations director and do the play-by-play. I knew I couldn't do it. I just know myself. And so it's not like I quit on the dream, but I said, well, let's take a step back, be a writer, and see if something develops from that. And incredibly, it did.
A lot of broadcasters at the highest level, they want to go national. They want to be the Joe Buck or the Jim Nance. For you to be someone who gets to connect with the Yankee fan base on a nightly basis or have the pulse of the city in the afternoon on the radio, how special is that compared to an alternative of being national?
I'll be honest, guys, there's certainly something in me that always wondered if I could do it nationally. Now that I've gotten older, maybe I've given up on it just a little bit. I got a little bit of a taste of it because ESPN for a couple of years had me do national games on the radio, and those were a blast. That's actually how I got to meet Aaron Boone. We worked together. I had met him as a Yankee, but really got to know each other. We did an Oakland A's and the Detroit Tigers playoff series. I've always thought about the national angle of it. If my act, would work nationally. But, when I bring that up to people, they go, you know what, being the voice of the Yankees is probably better than national. I think Joe Buck has a great gig. So I don't know if that's better. Anything could be better than that. But if you're not going to be a national announcer, being the Yankee announcer is probably the next best thing. So it's the biggest audience. It's the biggest city in the world. It's the most famous franchise in the world. So it's not like I'm taking a step back. But I do envy, Mike Breen to get to do the NBA Finals, when you're a local broadcaster in baseball and teams go to the World Series, it's like you dated a girl the whole year and somebody else takes you to the prom. So that kind of stinks. But the thing that gets me through it is that I get the chance to call 5 World Series while I was with John on the radio. So I got that out of my system, but it would be nice to actually, be able to do that. But again, it's certainly not a consolation prize doing the Yankee games.
Michael, back in November of 2018, you were able to receive the Vin Scully Award for Excellence in Sports Broadcasting from WFUV. When you think about your career path and the fact that it started right here at FUV, with everything that's happened in your career and the successes, how gratifying was it for you to receive that award when you consider the other recipients from years past?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm not being humble. I don't belong on that list. If you see the people that won it, I don't know how I'm on that list. I'm grateful that I won the award. I mean, you guys know how I feel about Fordham, but I look at Vin Scully as a broadcasting god, and I don't mean that to be sacrilegious. He's up on a mount that nobody's even close to. I mean, there's no Mount Rushmore of baseball broadcasters. There's one guy, and that's Vin Scully. Every other guy, all the legends, they're at a level below. I mean, for that guy to do what he did, into his 90s. I think it was 67 years with the Dodgers. Just amazing. And the best part of getting that award was getting that phone call from him welcoming to the club. I mean, that was the words he used. And then at the event at Lincoln Center, the video that he sent along, that's a career highlight. I mean, that's probably a bigger deal than going into the Baseball Hall of Fame, which is not going to happen. But that's just an amazing honor to be on a list of people that are so magnificent in their talent level. And then the name of the award is a guy that I look up to as a godlike figure in our business. I'll never forget it. Never forget it. It was awesome.
Michael, we really appreciate you taking a few minutes to join us and enjoy this next season of Yankee baseball.
Looking forward to it. I hope it's normal. I hope we get fans in the stands. That would be really great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Michael.